The letter arrived on a Friday, folded once and tucked under the door like a small, polite secret. I read it in the kitchen, the thin paper trembling between my fingers while the kettle whistled and my mother hummed an old hymn in the next room, shortlisted for state scholarship interview. 4 words that felt like a ladder thrown down into our lives. A ladder my family had been climbing for years. My father smiled with all the pride a retired civil servant could carry. My mother cried and smoothed the crease of the letter as if it were a prayer. For once, the math added up. Tuition paid, a roof that didn't groan, a future that did not have to be rewritten in small, careful letters. Honorable Eziobi's name was mentioned like a blessing. He was a man who cut ribbons on new classrooms, shook hands on television, and sent envelopes to the church when the pastor's microphone sputtered. In our neighborhood, he was not just a politician. He was proof that someone from Enugu could still be seen and listened to. I had seen him at gatherings, his hair smoothed back, his smile practiced, his laughter the kind that made people feel like they belonged to a better story. It made sense, in the small way that good things often do in poor places, that a scholarship would come from his office. The interview was not in an office. It was at his guest house, they told me, because he wanted to meet the students personally. I remember choosing a blouse I knew my mother loved, the one with the tiny blue flowers, and smoothing out the seam of my skirt until my hands tired. I rehearsed answers in the taxi, why I wanted to study education, how I would use the scholarship to help my family, until my voice was a flat thing, ready to be handed over. He was waiting in a room with curtains that swallowed the sunlight, making everything softer and more dangerous. The driver, the housekeeper, their nods were spare and precise, like parts of a machine. Honorable Eziobi offered his hand. It was warm and steady. He asked the questions that had been on my mind and some that were not. He complimented my confidence, my manner of speaking, the shape of my ambition. He told me how proud his office was to support bright girls from small towns. We spoke for a while about school, and then about my family, and then, as if the conversation had moved through careful civilized rooms and entered a corridor no one had mentioned, he asked if I would stay a little longer. Just to talk more, he said. I should have left. I can name the dozen reasons now, list each step like a series of warnings I missed. At the time, my answers were rusted with politeness and a fear I could not name. He poured me tea, and we sat closer. When someone respected by everyone tells you that staying will be good for your future, the world rearranges itself so staying seems reasonable. I listened to the way his voice could make the edges of a promise seem soft. I told myself it would be brief. He did not speak of the scholarship again that night. The memory I carry is not a clean sentence. It is a series of broken images. The way his hand surprised mine, the sudden weight of a laugh that was no longer about anything at all, the feeling of my legs pinned by a force that had nothing to do with politics or public service. I felt shame as the act happened, smaller and more useless than the space of the room. He stopped when he wanted to stop. I left when I could walk. When I told my parents, they sat at the kitchen table as if the room itself had been accused. My father's face went empty, then red. My mother touched my hair like someone smoothing out a tear that would not close. For a few minutes, there was only noise. The kettle, the distant call to prayer from a neighbor, the clock on the wall counting seconds that felt like accusations. Why would you put yourself there? My father asked finally, the question sharp with anger and wounded pride. I could see him measuring the cost, what our name would bear, what our neighbors would whisper. Pride, it seemed, had a ledger of its own, and my shame was an entry that would make them bankrupt. My mother's voice was softer, but no less final. We cannot fight this kind of man, she said. Do you want shame to kill your father? Do you want him to be disgraced? Her hands moved as if to gather something fragile, their security, the little safety they had stitched together under the years. They told me to forget it. They told me to accept the scholarship, to smile when envelopes arrived, to keep my mouth closed because silence was a currency we could afford. I went back to school with the paperweight of the money in my account and a new habit of looking at honorable men the way you look at knives, respectful from a distance, careful to keep your hands far from the edge. At night, the sounds came. The creak of my bed, the rustle of the mosquito net, the echo of a voice that had been both kind and cruel. I lay awake and replayed the interview like a film I had no power to pause. The scholarship continued to arrive. The house was quieter, as if the walls themselves had adopted a new patience. I learned then how poverty and respect can conspire to keep the truth folded, like the letter that started it all. Thin, polite, and tucked beneath a door. The new semester began like any other. Lectures, notes, examinations that smelled of ink and damp paper. But I moved through it with the awkwardness of someone who'd learned a new language and could not yet pronounce the words. People still said my name in the corridor with the same casual gentleness as before. They sat beside me in lectures, borrowed pens from me, invited me to study groups. None of them knew the thing that sat inside my ribs like a foreign seed. Amara watched me with something like reverence. She was 16 and had the kind of faith in grown men people call naivete. She believed adults had straightforward motives. When she came back from church or from friends' houses, she would hum Honorable Eziobi's praises. How he had cut the ribbon at the new clinic, how he had given money to a widow down the street, how his hair always smelled of something expensive. She called him Daddy Eziobi, as a joke that everyone laughed at, and I felt my stomach twist, as if that name were a splinter under my skin. At home, the house behaved like an animal learning to be still. My mother smiled more often, as if forcing cheerfulness could patch whatever raggedness was in the air. My father would sit at the veranda and stare at the road, as if waiting for an answer he knew would not come. The scholarship money made things easier in visible ways. My books arrived, the rooftop fixed its leak. There were new plates in the cabinet. The receipts were small, polite proofs of our bargain, the exchange of silence for security. Sometimes I would hold the envelopes and imagine the hand that sent them, and I found I could not make the image small enough to fit in any neat box of explanation. Sleep became a thief. I woke at unholy hours with the image of the guest house curtains in my head, and my palms would be damp as if carrying someone else's shame. In the day, I tried to be ordinary. I revised. I answered questions in class. I laughed when someone told a joke. At night, I cataloged memory like a clerk, making lists of faces, times, the exact words he had used, trying to place them in order. Some nights, the list ended with the same thing. Reason after reason why I should do nothing. The list was long enough to keep me quiet. Then, Honorable Eziobi started giving Amara attention. At first, it was small. A phone call where his voice took on that easy, persuasive cadence and asked about her studies. A message with a picture of a book he recommended. A transfer of a few thousand naira to her account for data. Amara beamed and told us over dinner, her eyes bright. He said he will help me find a mentor when I finish school, she said, and my throat closed so tightly I could not answer. I watched the way my mother's face softened when Amara mentioned the honorable. That look, the one that washed away worry, was the same look my mother had worn after the scholarship first came through. My father shrugged like a man who had been offered an opportunity and could not see the cost. We were a family, auditing the books of its conscience and deciding what could be written off as necessary. The first time I spoke to someone about it beyond the walls of our house was to Ngozi, my friend who worked at the local radio station. Ngozi was blunt and fierce in the way some women become fierce after seeing too many small injustices. I told her some of the truth, not everything, because even the telling felt like exposing a raw wound, and she listened like a person learning the map of a dangerous country. "You need evidence," she said plainly, and when she said it, I felt both relief and dread. Evidence was a blade that could cut both ways. People will never believe you on your word alone, not when he can put the whole town in his pocket. So I began to gather. I saved messages Amara's phone chattered with, the little photos that came with compliments, the transfers that pinged into her account. I recorded my own voice at night, saying what had happened in the guest house in the flat, deliberate tone of someone preparing a testimony. Sometimes I whispered into the phone and cried afterwards, because saying the words made them louder than they had been inside me. People began to notice the change in me. Some called it bravery, others called it strange. The university counselor asked if I needed time off. I said no, and meant it. When I saw Honorable Eziobi around town, at a school event, at the market opening, his smile sought mine like a predator testing a fence. He never looked like a villain. He looked like a man who had always belonged to the story everyone wanted to tell. One afternoon, returning from campus, I found Amara leaving the house with her backpack, eyes bright, a receipt clutched between her fingers. It was my father who handed it to her, a letter of introduction, smoothed and stamped. He kissed her on the forehead and said, "Go, child. Be grateful." She left without looking at me. Her back was straight with the weight of possibility. The letter in her hand smelled faintly of the guest house, the polished promises. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it blurred the world. I wanted to run after her and tear the paper into nothing. But I did not. I watched instead as she walked away, the thin sound of her shoes on the earth like a small assertion that the world could still be kind. By dusk, the house was quieter, but inside my chest there was a noise that would not settle. The list of reasons to stay silent had grown heavier, but a single new line had been added. A line that was not about shame or money. It was about Amara's laugh, the way it used to scatter through the house like coins. I could not let that be traded for anything. That night, I opened my message folder and stared at the exchanges between Honorable Eziobi and my sister. The screen glowed like a small altar. My thumb hovered over the save button. I thought of my mother's hands, smoothing out the letter that had begun all of this. I thought of my father's empty stare. I thought of Amara, who trusted everyone and believed in the simple kindness of men. I saved the messages and then, for a long time, watched the phone as if it might set itself on fire. When I finally closed my eyes, it was with the strange certainty that something had to break before anything could change. The silence had become a shape around us, comfortable to some, deadly to others. I wondered which of us would be brave enough to cut it open. Gathering proof felt like learning a private liturgy. Every message I saved, every recording I made, became a small, solemn act, an offering to a truth I was scared to speak out loud. I learned to be furtive in a house that had already become an exercise in pretending. When I charged the old phone with the evidence I was collecting, I held it like something fragile, like a bird that could fall at the wrong touch. I spoke into the recorder in the dark, my voice thin and flat, naming what had happened to me, as if saying each word would stitch it into something accountable. He did this. He did that. Hearing myself say it made my throat hurt, but it also made me real. Ngozi, with her blunt voice and lighter laugh, became the axis on which my courage turned. She took my files with both hands and did not look away. "We'll anonymize it. We'll frame it as a broader story about predatory politics and mentorship," she said, practical and protective. She warned me about the machinery I was about to face. He'll deny. He'll call you names. He'll use the whole town to smear you. But people listen to the radio. People listen when we put a voice on the air. Her certainty steadied me. For the first time in months, I let myself imagine the possibility that silence could be broken and that it would reverberate. But power is not gentle. It moves in soft, menacing ways. A Monday in late September, Honorable Eziobi came to our street. He came with men who smelled like the polished leather of cars and the money in their pockets. He came smiling, hands extended, stepping out of a convoy like a king exiting a small, grateful village. My mother fussed. My father stood straighter than I had seen in months. He handed Amara a neat envelope, something folded and stamped with his imprimatur, and his voice lowered in a way that made the air feel denser. "Your family has done well by you," he said. "I will help you when you finish school. Think of me as someone who opens doors." The way he said it, not a question, but a plan already in motion, made my stomach flip. Amara's eyes shone the way they always did when someone complimented her. My mother's hands were trembling as she accepted the envelope. It was a small ritual of exchange, his favor for our gratitude. I listened to my father laugh politely, and the laugh sounded like someone signing a contract with fine print he hadn't read. After the visit, as the men left and the dust settled, one of Honorable Eziobi's aides lingered near our gate. He watched me with the calm attention of someone cataloging assets. When he stepped forward, his voice was low and careful. coated with the politeness of a man used to having things go his way. "You have been careful?" he said. "But there are things that hurt people when they speak. Think of your family. Think of your sister." His eyes did not search for pity. They merely stated consequence. "It will be better for everyone if you keep quiet." I felt the familiar cage tighten. My fingers had the phone in my pocket, the thumbprint of proof buzzing under my skin. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, burning the recorded files like sacrificial paper. But then the man's face slipped, and in the way people often do when they forget the exact words they must wear, he said too much. "If you don't, we'll make sure the story stops before it starts." Opportunities disappear for troublemakers. He left the threat wrapped in civility and the lingering scent of car polish. I stood at the gate until the dust on the road settled. My mother peered from the window and then came to the sink to wash her hands with too much soap, as if she could scrub away the visit. My father muttered that this was politics, that men like Honorable Eziobi had entire systems at their backs. He told me quietly that perhaps I had misread the situation. His voice was not angry so much as exhausted, like a man tired of the math of risk in a life where options were few. That night, I replayed the aide's words and felt the heat of them. But also realized the man had given me something I could use. A threat spoken in the open, a piece of language that could be recorded, a motive for exposing him. I played back my own recording of the encounter, the aide's measured menace captured by my trembling hand. The file sounded raw and dangerous and, in its own way, true. I told Ngozi everything. She nodded slowly, folding the new recording into the others. "This is more than hearsay now," she said. "This is intimidation." "Will people listen?" I asked, because the question had become both weapon and weakness. "They will if we make them listen," she said. On the following Thursday, I saw Amara leave the house with a letter in her hand. The same letter she had been given before, only now it was stamped with a different instruction. My father had smoothed it, as if it were for a present. Amara hugged my mother and walked down the street toward the bus stop with the quick steps of someone who believes the future is a place that waits politely at the corner. She stopped by the gate and turned back once, eyes caught on me, searching for something in my face. For a second, we looked like two people passing in a church aisle, both part of the same congregation of normalcy, but each carrying a private prayer. She smiled, bright and ignorant of barbed wire, and then climbed into the yellow minibus. I watched until the bus disappeared around the bend, and then walked inside like a person returning to a quiet room after a storm. I opened my phone and cued the files. The guest house recording, the messages between Amara and Honorable Eziobi, the aide's threat. The evidence lay there like a small arsenal, and for the first time, the arsenal felt like something besides revenge. It felt like a ledger I owed to myself and to the girl with the bright laugh, who had already been offered the same sugar-coated poison I had been given. I did not sleep that night. The house breathed shallowly around me. I thought of Ngozi's voice, the radio's old, steady certainty. I thought of my mother's hands, smoothed and trembling. I thought of my father's ledger of shame. I knew then that whatever I did next would not be a private thing. It would ripple. The shape of my silence had changed. It no longer felt like protection, but like a slow, steady giving away of something that did not belong to anyone but me. When Ngozi called that morning, her voice was light in a way that tricked me for a second. "We're running it," she said. "Not anonymized. Your name. Your words." The radio station's studio hummed behind her, a steady, machine-smooth reassurance. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. A quiet handoff of tapes to someone official, a letter sent to a newspaper, a lawyer frowning at a stack of evidence. I had not imagined saying my name out loud over the airwaves. My breath stopped like a licked match. "You sure?" I asked. The question felt smaller and larger than the rest of the world. Ngozi laughed once, short and delighted. "You want justice, Chioma. You want it known. Let them deny it in daylight." By noon, my phone was alive with small explosions. First, supportive messages from classmates, short prayers, hearts, the stunned kind of solidarity that brought tears to my eyes. Then the other side. Calls from unknown numbers, silence, then heavy breathing, then a click. A text that read simply, "We could help you disappear." I let the phone lie on the table, its screen a small altar of both mercy and malice. Ngozi played my recording at 3. My voice over the speakers was stranger than hearing myself speak in recordings I had made in the dark. It was not the brittle voice that had cataloged facts for evidence. It was the voice of a person who had chosen to step into the light despite everything. I told the story of the guest house, of the tea and the curtains, the way a smile could fold into violence. I told of envelopes and the ledger of silence my family kept. At the end, I said the thing I had been practicing like a prayer. He raped me, and now he is grooming my sister. The town shook. I could feel it through the small tremors of my phone, through messages that came like pebbles thrown at a window. The Honorable's office released a statement before the radios had finished their news cycle. He called me a liar. He called me attention-seeking. He called me unstable. He said the scholarship was a public good, and that no one should mistake charity for coercion. His denial was a hand sweep that tried to erase fingerprints. Within hours, the effects of our small rebellion made themselves known. My mother's employer, a private school down the street that sold its virtue in neat uniformed rows, summoned her and said the controversy made it difficult for her to continue. The principal spoke in soft tones about reputation and parents who had concerns. My mother came home with her head bent, the way she had when she first smoothed the scholarship letter. That evening, the church pastor avoided the house's gate with the practiced gait of a man who knows which side of a congregation he must stay on. At market, neighbors I had grown up with crossed the road. A woman who had once borrowed sugar from my mother looked past us as if we had become something contagious. My father began to drink in a way that made his hands tremble. One evening, returning from the shop, he was stopped by 2 men who asked too many polite questions about our family's gratitude. They hinted at consequences for ungratefulness. He came home shaking and silent. "We should have kept quiet," he whispered to himself, as if saying it could fold the days back. And yet, there were other ripples. A small group from the city, a women's rights collective, sent a car and a lawyer. They spoke of protection orders, of filing complaints, of assembling witness statements. Ngozi connected me with a lawyer who said blunt things about libel and about power. He looked at the recordings, at the messages, at the AIDS threat, and then at me with the kind of seriousness that felt like armor. "You have more than emotion here," he said. "You have a chain. That matters." The Honorable's team was not idle. Posters appeared in the town square with his smiling face and the words, "A man for the people." Social media accounts that had been quiet for years suddenly spiraled to life with messages deriding me. Someone doctored a photograph and sent it around with a cruel caption. The lawyer's warnings about countersuits took shape in real time. I received a formal letter demanding a retraction and threatening a defamation case. The legalese of power had a polite hunger to it. Amara watched everything with a face that changed like the weather. She sat at the kitchen table and ate like a child with a secret stomach. At school, other girls asked her questions, some gentle, some sharp. Once she burst into tears in our bedroom and whispered, "Do you think Daddy Eziobi will stop liking me now?" Her vocabulary for betrayal was still thin. She saw the movements of the adults like a puzzle she had not been taught to solve. The worst came at night. Around 11, there was a knock at our gate. 3 men, voices soft with menace. They brought no certificates, no ribbon-cutting speeches. They brought the kind of civility that smells like oil. They asked for me by name, and then, when my mother told them I was not home, left a visiting card with a message. "We will help you forget." The card was stamped with a symbol I had seen on envelopes before. I slept badly, with the card under my pillow like a blister. The house seemed to hold its breath. I walked through the rooms like someone feeling for cracks. When I woke the next morning, there was a police notice stapled to the notice board at the market. A complaint has been made. A thorough investigation will follow. The words were sober, bureaucratic, and for the first time since the radio broadcast, they felt like possible scaffolding for truth. Standing at the gate, I watched the street. Men in clean shirts passed by, not glancing. A woman crossed with a baby on her back and touched my mother's hand with eyes full of apology. A boy from Amara's school gave a quick salute and walked away. Somewhere between the lovers of power and those who refused it, the town had split into small camps. I felt the fracture under my feet, like the beginning of an earthquake. I knew then that exposing him had not ended anything. It had started something. And whatever came next would demand more than my voice. It would demand a courage I had not yet fully measured. The day I first set foot in the courthouse, my legs felt like thin branches. People were everywhere, men in sober suits, women with fierce set mouths, children snatched from school and held by grandmothers who had come to watch the kind of theater they said never happened in their town. Cameras, which had once ignored us, now turned like hungry birds. I kept my head down, the recorder in my pocket humming like a small, steady heart. The case moved slower than I thought it would, and faster than I feared. Paperwork, arraignments, a judge who spoke in the flat, indifferent voice of the state, all the trappings of a system built to look fair while buying time for those with means. Honorable Eziobi arrived with a retinue and a glare that tried to reclaim the streets he used to own. He greeted lawyers and journalists with the practiced ease of a man who had never been interrupted. The prosecutor was a woman with a jaw that did not forgive hesitation. She put our evidence on the table. The messages, the transfers, my recordings, the aide's voice saying things I had captured on my phone. She called Ngozi, who described the way my radio piece had made the town wake up. She called the women's collective leader, who spoke of the pattern of predatory behavior. Piece by piece, they built a narrative that had weight and shape. Cross-examination is an ugly art. Honorable Eziobi's lawyer used every small cruelty as a tool. My past, my family's poverty, the scholarship envelopes that had kept our home. He tried to turn gratitude into confession, and he did it with a smile that made the air taste metallic. He asked me about my clothes, about my reasons for staying that night, about whether I had ever been untruthful. Each question felt like a worm probing an apple. I let myself be probed and did not give them rot. Amara's testimony was the most difficult moment. She sat on the witness stand with her hands folded like a child holding prayer beads. Her voice shook at first, thin and small, but every time she swallowed and continued, something in the courtroom leaned toward her. She spoke about the messages, the gifts, the way a man in power feels like an answer to every small hunger. She did not use the word grooming, not because she did not know it, but because she spoke in the language she had. He said he would take care of me. He said I was special. The court listened. My father did not come to testify. He came once, sat at the back, and left before the session ended. I could see him sometimes outside the hearing, a man made smaller by shame and by the reality that silence had cost him the trust of his daughters. My mother did come. She sat through the proceedings like someone holding a bowl of hot water, willing to endure discomfort if it meant warming another. After Amara testified, she stood and walked toward the stand. She did not speak in the courtroom, but later, in a small room outside the press's reach, she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Forgive me." The words unlatched something in me I had been holding raw. Forgiveness did not erase what had happened, but it made a line in the air where we might begin. There were moments of cruelty. A witness who tried to claim the messages were planted. A politician who called for calm and respect for process in a voice that trickled like oil. There were also moments of mercy. A woman I did not know, a student from a neighboring town, came forward and said she had been helped by the Honorable in what sounded like the same pattern. Her courage was a small, tremulous echo of everything I had tried to start. When she spoke, you could feel the balance shift. The verdict was not the sudden cinematic blow I had wondered about. It arrived in a slow, formal series of words. Guilty. The judge's voice was detached and then, in a softer cadence, gave the sentence with the gravity of a man closing a book. Honorable Eziobi stood like a statue whose paint was flaking. There was no triumphant crying in the courtroom. There was instead a long-held breath that seemed to belong to many people at once. Afterwards, the town changed in ways that were both small and enormous. The posters came down. The rumor mills that had once spun lies about me slowed, although they did not stop entirely. Mud that is thrown may never wash all the way off. My mother's job was eventually returned by a principal who said the school had been hasty. It was a small restitution, but one that mattered because it meant our daily life was not adrift. My father drank less. He began, clumsily, like a man learning a new gait, to look at Amara and me without the flinch of shame. People began coming to me at the market, in church, at campus. Women I did not know gripped my hands and told me their stories. Some cried. Others smiled with a fierce gratitude that made my chest ache. With Ngozi's help, I began meeting with younger girls at the community center. We talked about consent and power and how to name things before they became mountains. It was messy work. Imperfect, sometimes clumsy, often interrupted by life's demands. But it felt like repair. None of this made the nights easier. I still woke sometimes with the curtains in my head and the old, small voice that asked whether I had been right to speak. But the mornings were different. There was an edge to them now, a clarity I had not known when silence felt like a coat I had to wear. Amara started a small scholarship of her own, saving phone bundle money and teaching younger kids. She laughed like a bird regaining its sky. In the end, I realized the reckoning was not a single act, but 1,000 small continuations. The Honorable's conviction did not fix everything. Systems are clever at healing their surfaces while leaving the roots alone. But his fall made space. It taught people that the ledger of shame could be balanced another way, that gratitude does not erase harm, and that power is answerable, at least sometimes. On the day I walked out of the courthouse for the last time as a witness and a plaintiff, Amara walked with me. We stood on the steps in the late light. She took my hand without drama, the kind of touch that says everything and nothing at once. "We did it," she whispered, and I laughed in a way that was not clean but was honest. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and steady and strangely lighter, as if someone had opened a window in a long, dark room. Voices still whispered in the markets. People still chose comfort over courage some days. But when I closed my eyes, I could see a different town, one where a girl might not have to learn the language of silence the hard way. We walked home with the day slanting like a promise. The price of silence had been paid in ways I could never have counted. But in its place, something else had begun to grow. A small, stubborn root of truth that would not be easily pulled up.